Hi, I'd like to share with you my workflow for doing test-driven development with AI coding agents, which is the most reliable and productive way that I've found so far to use AI coding agents to write production code, which you know works. My name is Douglas, and I have been a software engineer for around 20 years. I have been practicing test-driven development for around 15 years, and I have been teaching, mentoring, and coaching other engineers to use test-driven development for about the last 10 years in various ways. I've been using AI coding agents for about 9 months to write production code, and my results have been a bit mixed. Sometimes it does a pretty good job. Sometimes it looks like it's done an amazing job. But when you look more closely, you discover there are problems with what has been produced. For example, I was working in a codebase which didn't have very many unit tests, and I was asked to make some changes to one of the methods in the codebase. The method was around 100 lines long, so of reasonable complexity. I asked the AI coding agent to write me the tests to cover this method. And yeah, on the surface, it looked like it did a pretty good job. What actually happened was the AI coding agent nearly covered my method with unit tests, which almost did what I wanted them to do. I noticed that some of the assertions were too lenient. There were some tests that didn't add any additional code coverage. There were tests which the stubs for which didn't use argument matches, so they would return, the stubs would return values no matter what arguments were sent to them, and some of the behavior just wasn't tested at all. All of this meant that I wasn't able to fully trust the code, or the test in this case, that the AI coding agent had generated, which meant that I had to go through and review every test and every line of every test to make sure that it was doing what I thought it was doing or what I wanted it to do. This created a problem because I hadn't written the test, so I had no real mental model of what the testing strategy was. So I had to read every test, try and understand how each piece of behavior was tested by which test, work out which tests were missing, if there were any, and all of this took quite a long time. At some point, whilst I was experimenting, trying to get AI coding agents to write unit tests for me, I came across a couple of videos by an engineer called Paul Hammond, who was using AI coding agents but getting them to do test-driven development. And I had a couple of realizations. The first realization was that I was no longer using my test-driven development discipline. I think that perhaps the promises of AI coding agents had blinded me somewhat and blinkered me or convinced me that I wouldn't need to use a discipline like test-driven development anymore. But the second was that I could see from my experience with trying to get it to write the unit tests and my experience using test-driven development, I could see what a great fit it could be if you could get an AI coding agent to follow test-driven development in a disciplined way. For those of you who haven't had much experience with test-driven development, here is a quick summary. Test-driven development is a discipline for writing software which splits up the specification, the implementation, and code design phases into 3 steps which are completed as a cycle. The 3 steps are described as the red step, the green step, and the refactor step. The red step is where you specify what it is that you want your code that you're about to write to do. And you do this in the form of a failing test. The green step is the step in which you implement the code to make the failing test pass. The final step is the refactor step. And this is an opportunity for you to pause, to look at the code which you've written, to look at the tests which you've written, and to see if there are any improvements in the design of the code which you might like to make. You're not changing what the code does, you're changing how it does it. And whatever you change, it shouldn't suddenly make the tests fail. And if the tests are passing, you can move back to the red step and implement your next failing test. There were a few things that made me think that test-driven development with AI coding agents could be a great fit. The first was the incremental nature of test-driven development, building up the test suite and the implementation one test at a time meant that I would be able to read every line of every test and the implementation, and I would build up that mental model of which tests had been written, why they had been written, what the code was that had been implemented to satisfy those tests. And also you'd get all the usual benefits that you get with test-driven development. So I'd be building up a test suite so that if the AI coding agent did anything weird and broke a whole load of stuff, then I'd know about it, and it would give me good commit points. So when all the tests were green, I can commit. Makes it easy to roll back any changes that the coding agent had done. As well as those benefits of using test-driven development, I'd still get the benefits of the AI coding agents, because I could generate the tests using the AI coding agent. I could make it implement the code to make the test pass, and I could get it to suggest refactorings for me and maybe complete some of those refactorings as well. So I started to try and get the AI coding agents to do test-driven development, but this wasn't as straightforward as I thought it might be either. There were several problems that I ran into trying to get the AI agents to work in this way. One of the problems I had was it was hard to stop them jumping ahead. So they would implement more of the solution than was necessary to just make the last failing test pass. Another problem I had was that even though I was using plan mode with my AI coding agent, it still wasn't able to keep track of the test list that I was working through. The tests in the list would get lost over multiple prompts. The test list would change. It just didn't feel like I could trust the AI coding agent to keep track of that test list so I could work through the tests in a logical and consistent manner. Sometimes the AI coding agent would go ahead and implement multiple tests at once. And other problems I experienced included the coding agent just commenting out the test or commenting out the assertions if it couldn't figure out how to make the test pass. And also I found the test agents quite slow to run the tests if I got the coding agent to run the tests themselves. Okay, so now onto the workflow itself. My workflow has three basic elements. The first is that I get the AI coding agent to stop or pause after each red, green, and refactor step so that I can do some things. The second is that I keep a physical task list or test list in a file. And the third is that I run the test myself and I do my own commits. It's not rocket science, it's very basic, but it gets me what I need from the AI coding agent. I want to show you my workflow by doing a short demo. First of all, I'll give you a quick overview of the demo app, and then I'll take you through the workflow. I'm going to base this on an application that I'm writing, which is a small application to manage do-nothing scripts. Do-nothing scripts were invented or written about by Dan Sliman, and they are a way to gradually automate a process. So you start with a simple script. I believe this is written in Python. And to begin with, each of the steps are just printing instructions. So it's essentially a manual process. Over time, you can automate each of these steps, and it's just quite a nice way of moving from a process which is manual to an automated process. So this is the application as it currently stands. As I say, not much has been implemented yet. I've got a main file and I'm testing through this main function and a run function, and I've got a test file for each of those. So a main test file and a run test file. We run the application by passing a test script to the application. This is a sample test script. It has one function. Inside that function, we just have an echo statement. And so when I run the application, you can see that simply the output is the step name, which is taken from the function name, and then the hello from the echo, and an instruction to press enter to continue, which closes the app. Now I'm ready to walk you through the workflow. Let's have a look at what that looks like in practice. This is my physical test list, which I have created ahead of time. I've written in all of the test cases that I'm expecting to cover, and really it is a sort of record of the shared understanding between me and the coding agent as to what progress has been made and what we still need to implement. We can easily keep track of progress by marking these tests as complete as and when we complete them. I've implemented a few of these tests. I've got some more to implement. I've also got my CLAUDE.md file, which is quite a short file. Just has a bit of information about what the application is, that it's a little application to create, manage and run do nothing scripts. It's written in Go, and that the project will be written using test-driven development, and this is the test-driven development process that I want the agent to follow. And this is pretty basic description of red-green-refactor with the additional instruction that I want the AI coding agent to pause after each step, after each red step, after each green step, and after each refactor step, so that I can do the checks that I want to do. Check that the assertions have been written correctly, check that the tests are failing for the correct reason, run the tests, do a commit if necessary, check the refactoring hasn't broken anything, check to make sure that the AI coding agent didn't update any tests when it was doing the refactoring. Those are the steps that I'll do myself, and then there's some more information about it. Yes, no, really don't implement more than you need to. Really wait for my instruction at the end of each test. Really don't skip ahead in the process, just to hammer the point home. So let's start our test-driven development process. The last thing I did on this project was to complete this display step name, which was just a hard-coded step name, and I've written the failing test, I've written the implementation, I've checked that in. So the next step will be another red step, which will be to write a failing test for this test, which is to display a step name for a differently named step. So that will require parsing. I won't be able to rely on the hard coding the step name. And before we write the failing test, it's important to check to make sure that all of the tests we've currently got are working, are passing, and they do. So we can go ahead and write that failing test. Pre-AI coding agents, I would have written that test by hand, but we can now use AI coding agents to write the test for us. So let's do that. Please implement the next failing test test list. Await my instruction when complete. Okay, the coding agent has written the failing test and stopped as per my instruction. Just check that the test fails for the right reason. Okay, so this has got a different step name, deploy application. This one has a different step name, so we are triangulating, And yes, it's expecting step one deploy application in the output. That looks fine. The test now fails for the right reason, which means that red step is complete. Let's move on to the green step, which is to write the code to make that failing test pass. Please implement the code to make the failing test pass. Only implement what is required to make this test pass. Await my instruction when complete. Okay, so it has implemented the code to make the test pass. This is the test. This is the code that it's implemented. Interestingly, it's using buffio.newScanner this time. Previously it's used OS read file, but it's okay. I can also see that it is parsing the step names, and it's also formatting them at the same time, which I'm not sure about at the moment, but that might be a refactoring for later. But we can check to see if the test pass. And the test pass now. So I can go ahead and ask Claude to mark the last test as complete, await my instruction when complete. Okay. Go ahead and commit that. Okay, that's the green step complete. I'm not going to do any refactoring right now, just because this video is already getting very long. So that means we can move back to the red step and implement the next failing test. The next test on our test list to complete is the display step complete after enter. So after a step has been run successfully, I just want a message which displays saying step complete. I think actually what I want it to do here is to output the name of the step and that it should be complete. So I can just update Claude to write the test so that it includes the step name as being complete. Perhaps it's worth pointing out that I'm only able to course correct like this because I've asked the coding agent to do the test-driven development steps one at a time, stopping in between each step. So because I've asked it to stop here, I can take a look and see that the assertion wasn't what I want it to be. Okay, that looks good. Go back to Golang, run the tests. Test fails, something complete after enter, but didn't include the step one complete message. Okay, that's the red step for the step complete, test complete. And we can move on to the next green step, which will be to implement the code to make that test pass. Waiting my next instruction. Okay, go and have a look at the code. Okay, there's our test. There's our update, nice and simple. Check to see whether or not the test now pass. test now pass. And so I can ask Claude, please mark the last test completed as complete. Commit that. Code step completion message. Okay, and that's another green step complete. Looking back at the test list, you can see that we now have marked a couple of tests as complete. One to display the actual step name that's in the script file, and another to display a message after each step has been completed. As you have seen, there's a fair amount of duplication between the prompts that I use, which is why I've started to use skills. So I currently have 3 skills set up. I have next test, which writes the next failing test. I have implement test, which implements the code to make that failing test pass, and I have mark test complete. Using these skills really improves the flow of the test-driven development cycle. So I can say next test. It's working out what the next test is to implement. Can't actually remember. Display all the step names. Okay. So multiple step names in this one. Then go and check to make sure that that test fails for the right reason. It doesn't fail for the right reason because it's hanging. So it thinks that the test is hanging because it never receives the second enter. I guess there should be a timeout if the second enter isn't received. Okay, we can go and try and run that test. The test fails because the output doesn't contain the second step. So that's the red step for the step complete, test complete. And we can move on to the next green step, which will be to implement the code to make that test pass. So we can go back to Claude and invoke the implement test skill. Okay, Claude says it's updated it so that it is running for all steps. So pass steps now returns all of the steps and does a for each across, or does a for loop, sorry, across each of the steps and outputs what we need. Okay, so let's see if that passes. Okay, and that passes. So I just need to tell Claude to use the mark test complete skill. And then I can commit. Handle scripts with multiple steps. As another green step is now complete, it is a bit of a shame that I'm not going to show any refactorings, which is an often missed step in the test-driven development cycle, but I'll make some other videos which show refactorings if anyone is interested in what that looks like. That's all I was going to show today. I hope that gives you a flavor of the workflow that I've been using. As I said earlier, it's not rocket science. It's just using a physical test file, making the coding agent stop between each of the red, green, and refactor steps, and running your tests and committing manually. I find that working this way keeps me on the same page as the coding agent in the same way as you would do if you were pair programming with a real human. It also ensures that I know that the coding agent is giving me exactly what I want. It also enables me to think more about the design and refactorings that I might want to do to improve the design, because I'm spending less time writing the code and writing the tests because we're leveraging the power of the AI coding agent to do that. and also getting it to do some of the refactorings. And we have the safety net of a growing suite of unit tests. Also, running the tests and doing my commits outside of the coding agent is just faster and uses less tokens. One of the other things that I think it's worth mentioning is that I've written this application in Go, but I've never written any application in Go. It's not a language I know, and it's not a language that I use. And I think that really sort of demonstrates the power of this workflow, in that I can write in a language and be productive in a language that I don't really know, because I have that shared understanding of what the AI coding agent has written, and I have the tests which show me that what it has written works. I would be interested to hear from a Go expert regarding the quality of the code that the AI agent produced, and if there are any interesting choices that the AI coding agent made, then please do leave a comment or send me a message. More broadly, I would be really interested in hearing what everybody's experiences are of using AI coding agents, the good and the bad. So yeah, please do get in touch. I think this workflow would be good for anyone who is well practiced in test-driven development. Obviously, I think you'll be able to get the most benefit from this immediately. But I also think it would be interesting for anybody learning test-driven development. Perhaps I would suggest a modification whereby you would write the tests by hand as well, and then just use the AI coding agent for their implementation. And that should enable you to focus more on what tests you need to write for a particular behavior and how to write that test, and not worry so much about how you have to implement the code to make that test pass. That might speed up your learning of test-driven development. So if your team are using AI coding agents, but you are not sure whether you can trust the quality of the code that they are producing, or you're having problems, then I can help. I run workshops and coaching sessions for individuals and teams for exactly this: getting teams productive using test-driven development and AI coding agents together. My links are in the description below. Thanks for watching. Until next time.